What's up, guys? Today's Monday, October 22nd. Be sure and check out the full version of NHL Inside the Lab over at Fantasy Labs. After the preview, stick around for some additional free analysis on today's four-game slate. Also, as a bonus, going to give you guys one of my favorite player prop bets of the night. Per usual, the full player props article can be found at the Action Network. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let's jump in. Luckily, we have some NHL hockey to talk about today. It is a smaller slate, just four games. Before we get into anything specific, Sean, you have anything for us on news and notes?
No, not much is going on with news and notes for these teams, it doesn't look like. So it should be a pretty straightforward day. I haven't seen Washington and Vancouver as of yet. They haven't had their morning skates. But the other teams, nothing really should be massively impactful thus far.
Yeah, you mentioned it being kind of a straightforward day. I'm really narrow right now. So we'll start on the team ratings page. Stands out right away, this matchup for Carolina. They are on the road against Detroit. But if we just look at defense over the past month, we have a couple teams at the top that are giving up a ton of shots. Detroit kind of middle of the pack there, but as we know, Carolina shoots the puck a ton. They're out of any team on this entire slate. Their system just revolves around a lot of shots, so not surprising to see them at the top. Corsi 4 expectation on the slate. They also have the highest matchup rating on the slate, so really good spot for Carolina. Detroit's given up the fourth most power play opportunities this year, so decent spot. We'll have to check some pricing on Carolina. But any thoughts on that game, Sean?
Yeah, Carolina's been showing all year that they're willing to shoot the puck at will. So Carolina against a weak Detroit team, that's a very nice situation to be in. And then you have a few other games, like you have Washington against a very poor Vancouver team, but the game is in Vancouver. There's definitely going to be a lock going into that game, which we'll touch a little bit more on when we go to the models. Joe and I were just discussing the person after, and it may not be the person you're thinking it is. But yeah, there's some decent games tonight. It's a pretty narrow slate, and with there only being four games, you're going to probably end up being very small in your player pool, I think.
Yeah, I really like the Washington game as a whole. The usual suspects from Washington. We do have a play we like on the Vancouver side of things as well. Sets up really well in special teams. Both these teams are top 10 in power play opportunities against. As far as the shots side of things, Vancouver has been giving up a decent amount of shots. Washington as well. So sets up for kind of a high-paced game in Vancouver. Also interested in Winnipeg versus St. Louis. It is kind of outside our top tier, but looks to be a really good spot as well. Any thoughts on St. Louis and Winnipeg, Sean?
Yeah, I like both sides of that game. You have some guys that are relatively cheap to what they should be. You have guys like Vladimir Tarasenko's at 6,700. That's a bit cheaper than what you would normally expect him at. You have Patrick Laine's in the mid 6K. So these guys are just a little bit cheaper than what you would expect these elite level goal scorers to be at. And most of that is just because they haven't been as hot to start the season as you would expect someone of their caliber to be.
In a vacuum, this matchup with Colorado and Florida looks pretty decent for the Philadelphia side. Colorado has allowed the fifth most shots against this year, but at the same time, Colorado hasn't been shooting much. So as a team, doesn't set up from that perspective very well. But yeah, I'm pretty locked into Carolina, Detroit, and Washington, Vancouver game. Anything else before we move into Vegas, Sean?
No, I think that Philly, you definitely are going to have some guys that are relatively cheap on their team as well. They've shifted around their lines a little bit, which if you go to our team lines pages, you'll be able to see what Philadelphia is doing. But they definitely have some plays against a Colorado team that's giving up quite a few shots that make a decent amount of sense.
All right, let's move over to Vegas. So the top implied total team on the slate is the Carolina Hurricanes on the road against Detroit. But it's pretty flat overall. So these kind of slates shape up pretty well for tournaments, especially it seems like we have some pretty clear spots that we want to attack. Washington, Winnipeg, right behind Carolina. Any surprises here?
No, it looks like everything's pretty straightforward with what you would expect these lines to be. You see a little bit of a movement in the Philly game towards Philly, and you see a little bit of movement in the Winnipeg game towards St. Louis. And then the one that you would expect to be the biggest favorite on the night probably is Carolina against Detroit at home, and that is the biggest favorite on the night currently. It did not open as such, but it has moved to that. So I think it just goes to what we've been talking about tonight with Carolina being one of the best options of the slate.
Yeah, not a ton really to gain from the Vegas page, to be completely honest. There's not really a massive favorite. As far as the percentage of bets, looks like Winnipeg's leading the way there, but not a lot really to talk about here. So let's just move right over to model. All right, so again, be sure and check out the full video over at Fantasy Labs, but wanted to give you guys a little bit of additional free content today. And starting with the Washington Capitals, we'll go position by position like we do per usual. Kind of a weak position today at center, but I don't mind Evgeny Kuznetsov. I've talked about it a little bit with Sean over the days prior to this slate, but he's not a guy that's normally a super high volume shooter, only 80th percentile over the past year. But if we look at over the past month, 95th percentile. And normally I would say that that's going to kind of skew towards his longer term mean. But I do really like Kuznetsov. I think that his usage on the power play is what we can be extremely excited about. So 98th percentile in power play shots over that same time period. It's not that he's really taking a ton away from Ovi on a slate to slate. Still think that Ovi has a really strong floor, but at 8K, Kuznetsov could easily end up being the preferred option. If anything else, just another way to stack Ovi with Kuznetsov. Definitely on that. Outside of that, at the center position, I don't mind Jordan Staal over for the Hurricanes. So if we move over to Carolina, Jordan Staal at just 6,300. He is a much better value over on FanDuel, but a guy that's just shooting the puck at a pretty high rate, 97th percentile in Corsi, which is something that really matters at the center position. And people might be off him after he's had a couple games in a row where he didn't have a ton of shots on goal. He is getting a lot of power play usage as well, and I definitely think that that's a strong matchup today against a Detroit team that's given up the fourth most power play opportunities this year. Definitely think it's an awesome spot for Carolina. So keep an eye on these guys. Those are the two centers that I'm kind of on at this moment. You can definitely make an argument on any slate for Nathan MacKinnon. 99th percentile in shots over the past month. Also blocks a decent amount of shots as well. But at 8,100, it is kind of a tougher spot for Carolina or for Colorado today against Philly. I definitely think there's better spots, but you'll get lower ownership at MacKinnon in tournaments. So I definitely think that that's somewhat intriguing. If we go over to the winger position, I think things get a little bit more interesting today. So winger, it's one of those slates where I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of pay for the mid-range. One guy that I am kind of looking at is Claude Giroux for Philly on the other side of this game. I think that he's at a really good price point at 6,100. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards in roster construction right now, is having a lot of these guys in the mid-range. So he did drop a goose egg on the last game. So again, trying to jump on guys that have been shooting the puck a lot lately, but maybe the public is off of. Definitely think Giroux is in a really solid GPP spot today. And looking kind of down the salary scale a little bit, it's kind of thin, but one of the guys that I'm interested in a decent amount is Vladimir Tarasenko. So he's a guy that's underperformed a little bit as far as his goal scoring, but that's probably the reason his price is all the way down to 6,700. I don't know if we're going to see this guy in this range for much longer. These goal scorers tend to skew back to their mean of kind of being high producers more often than not over the course of the season. So Tarasenko, guy, 99th percentile in shots on the power play. So decent opportunity there for this game for him to get back on track. And outside of that, Patrick Laine in a really similar position for Winnipeg, kind of a mid-range play at 6,300. Similarly to Tarasenko, I guess one of these guys that's a high volume shooter, but as you can see, he doesn't have a ton of goals relative to the last couple of years. So really like Laine and Tarasenko in the mid-range, and GPPs definitely think Claude Giroux is a strong play. Looking at defense, you can always make a case for a guy like John Carlson for Washington. He's going to be a part of that stack that you probably will need if Washington does go nuts today. Kuznetsov, Ovi, and then getting Carlson on that power play usage definitely makes a lot of sense. But these guys are really expensive on a slate where there's not a ton of value. Not sure how viable that is. I think I prefer the other side of this game with Alexander Edler. This guy has just been incredible lately as far as his peripheral stats. So if we just look at him here, he's in the 99th percentile in blocks over the past month. Just the floor you get from this guy is just been incredible. So again, the last game kind of underperformed a little bit, but before that, he just has a massive amount of floor here from just his block shots alone. He's seeing a ton of time on ice, and at 5,600, I think he's one of the best plays on the slate in cash games. Don't necessarily have to stack him with these other Vancouver guys, but if you're looking for like a one-off play from your stacks, definitely think Edler is a really strong play at defense. Outside of that, it's a pretty thin slate. I think that you can make an argument for Dougie Hamilton. He's probably my third favorite option on the slate after these two guys that we talked about. But Hamilton in this Carolina game that we really like, he is on the second unit. So that definitely takes away from his ceiling a little bit, but another guy that just has a fantastic floor. Look at his shot volume, 6 shots, 7 shots over the past 2 games. He's a guy that's in the 90th percentile in shots plus blocks, 99th in shot attempts. So really like Dougie Hamilton, has probably one of the best floors on the entire slate, and these defensemen are underpriced. So 5,400, just a fantastic value for Hamilton. And that's pretty much going to do it, guys. I think that at goaltender, I'm more or less going to be looking to correlate with my stacks today. You can definitely make an argument for Jimmy Howard, which I'll talk about in the prop section. So per usual, guys, if you want to check out this full article over at the Action Network, definitely recommend it so you can get an eye for the exact book that I'm targeting and the line that I'm currently looking at. But definitely want to be long on Jimmy Howard today in this game. Carolina has by far the most shots in the league, 42.1 to start the year. And another data point in favor of Carolina is they've surprisingly scored only 3.25 goals to start the season, kind of middle of the pack relative to how many shots they've had on a given slate. So definitely think that Howard on the over makes a ton of sense today. There's going to be a lot of shot volume coming from the Carolina side of this game, as we've talked about a lot. That's it for today, guys. If you like my work and you want to support my work, be sure and check out Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. If you'd like to take that a step further, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't already, give this video a like. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's small slate. Last thing, give me a follow over on Twitch if you want. Definitely going to be doing a ton of live streams over there throughout the week. All the details are in the description below. All right, good talk. See you guys out there.